I will now call to order the public works session. And Madam Clerk, would you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir, Mr. Barnes. Mr. Battle.
Here.
Mrs. Lucasberg.
Here.
Mr. Moody.
Here.
Dr. Whitaker. Mr. Woodard.
Here.
Mayor Glover.
Here. Thank you, ma'am.
Yes, sir.
Ms. Jones, are you prepared to proceed with your items, ma'am?
Yes, sir.
You have the floor.
Good evening. Initially, we had the pavilion as the first item to discuss tonight, but unfortunately, due to scheduling conflicts, they will not be presenting tonight. So the first item on the agenda will be the homeless initiative to be led by the Department of Social Services Director, Ms. Pamela Littlehill. Pam, you may begin when you're ready.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, members of City Council, City Manager, and citizens. So today we're going to talk about what we've been doing in terms of the homeless initiative. With the onboarding of our new city manager, that was assigned to social services. So we're going to talk a little bit about tonight of the things we've been working on. So if you remember back in 2019, there was a study done by the city with Thomas P. Miller and Associates, and they identified 4 areas: education, workforce, city services, and crime policing that they made recommendations for. Our area for the Department of Social Services and Behavioral Health was the homeless initiative. So what are some of the things that we're working on? And we've been steadily, these are continued works. We are still working on issues as it relates to food security, eviction diversion, and talking about the implementation and development of this homeless singles shelter in the city of Portsmouth. As it relates to food security, we provide Portsmouth citizens with support via our food pantry. We continue to develop and collaborate with different organizations in the community as it relates to food distribution events. We continuously work with citizens to apply for SNAP benefits. There's always ongoing exploration of state and federal opportunities, i.e. the Virginia Food Access and Investment Fund, and continue to seek to establish what we're looking at right now, and I'll explain later, the Virginia Fresh Match program. So the Virginia Fresh Match program, it works in conjunction with the SNAP benefits from DSS. And that is a program where citizens are able to use their SNAP benefits and get double the produce. So what that might look like, if you spent $10 in SNAP benefits in the farmer's market, it would be equivalent to $20. So what we're doing is investigating that and seeing how to implement that in Portsmouth. So we've had meetings with Williamsburg and other localities to see what we need to do to apply for that. We've had conversations with the head of the current farmers market president right now to look and see, would they be interested in that? We've actually done a survey with the vendors in the farmers market, just to capture whether or not they would be interested in a project like that. There's several of them that are. And it won't just be produce. It could be produce, dairy, meats, things like that. So that's what we're working on right now, and I've assigned that to our resiliency officer, Gina Harris. Eviction diversion. So, as you know, with COVID, DSS continues to get calls like anyone else as it relates to assistance in housing. So, eviction diversion, that's a topic that stays on our radar. When we get those calls, we triage those calls. The state is still offering rental assistance. They do it now from the state instead of the localities. So we still work with people and give them that information so that they can contact VDSS. We're still exploring funding, that's vouchers to address rental arrears and housing. Still working to connect local resources. So when people call, we're still connecting you to legal aid for kids and any other agency within our continuum of care. And I'm going to talk about the continuum of care in the next slide. What I want to reflect on or go back to is that when the city did spend money, and we were helping our citizens as it related to mortgage and relief and utility assistance. We paid out the city of Portsmouth $899,649 in rent and mortgage relief. In addition to that, for utility assistance, we paid out $175,507 for a total of $1,075,156. So let's talk about the Portsmouth Homeless Action Consortium, better known as PHAC. PHAC was established in 1996, and it is a group of agencies working together on a mission to decrease homelessness and improve the quality of life for our Portsmouth citizens. PHAC is an ongoing resource in this city and our continuum of care, so it's actually PHAC COC, where we work together, all the agencies, in terms of providing support services to our citizens. How you access PHAC if you are looking at the crisis housing hotline, that's the number for people to call. You will call our crisis housing hotline. They would triage the call and then connect you with various supports from agencies within the city who have been dedicated to providing homeless assistance. So some of those services would include our information as it relates to emergency shelter, housing assistance, food and clothing, veteran services, employment services, and other community support services. So PHAC has been a long-standing entity in the city of Portsmouth for quite a while, and DSS serves as the co-chair, one of the co-chairs. Darling Washington, who's behind me, is the other co-chair. But we serve as the collaborative applicant or the lead agency for the Portsmouth COC. In terms of PHAC, in May of 2021, PRHA was awarded 18 emergency housing vouchers. PRHA is currently working with PHAC to provide those vouchers right now to our homeless citizens. There are 11 applications have been submitted thus far in terms of our count as it relates to those housing vouchers. 4 were actually solidified and awarded to citizens. But to access those, you still have to go through the PHAC coordinated entry system. You still do. So there is a process. You still call that crisis housing hotline. They triage the call. When we look at people to get housing beds, so to speak, what you need to do is they actually look at people in terms of priority. So we do get a lot of calls in this city, but there are certain people or criteria that is utilized by HUD to determine who's priority on that list. And based on where you score and where you are, that determines what resources are afforded to you first. It doesn't mean that there aren't other support services that would be provided to you in the city, but again, in terms of a housing vacancy, again, you have to remember there could be a whole list of people, so it looks at who's the priority, what is going on in the dynamics of that household, who gets there first, and that's how a decision is made. So the Portsmouth Hotline coordinated entry data, I wanted to give you some ideas so that you know what's going on in this city. The numbers that I'm giving you are from October 2020 to September of 2021. So 4Kids is an agency that operates our central hotline for all our crisis calls. The calls for housing and support are managed there are different localities that all involved in this coordinated entry system. So they not only answer the phone calls for anybody who comes in from the crisis line for Portsmouth, 4Kids also answers the phone and takes those crisis calls for the other cities mentioned, Norfolk, Chesapeake, Western Tidewater, Virginia Beach, and the Peninsula. So all the calls come into a central hotline, and then they are dispersed within their locality based on what those resources are. 4Kids has a list of all the resources that are available here in Portsmouth, so when they triage those calls, they then direct the citizens to the appropriate service. The total calls that have come in during this time frame to that crisis housing hotline is 4,998. Some of those calls, though, can be duplicate calls from somebody calling in again and looking at the status of those cases. Unduplicated calls is 2,542, and the percentage of calls for Portsmouth that have come through that line is 9%. When we look at coordinated entry, those calls that have come in terms of people that we've actually housed, rapid rehousing, there were 25 people housed, transitional housing, 5, other citizens who we may have been able to connect with other friends or families, it was 18 of those. When it says rental by client but no subsidy, that would mean that this was somebody that was housed, but they didn't require any assistance from a subsidy. Maybe they had their own funds, but they just needed a place, and housing was assistance was provided for them. Permanent supportive housing, 20 people for a total of 78 people housed during this time frame. Portsmouth Behavioral Healthcare Services. So I wanted to let you know about Shelter Plus Care, and if you don't mind, Nate? Shelter Plus Care is a service operated through behavioral health, but what people don't know is Shelter Plus Care also helps with housing. And I'm going to ask Nathan Whitted, the Director of Behavioral Health, to explain that.
Good to see you, Mr. Woodard.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, Council. Shelter Plus Care program, again, is part of the COC, which is the Continuum of Care program that we have here in Portsmouth. This is a program that is through HUD. This program allows us to provide rental assistance to persons that are homeless. Again, we look directly at what the HUD criteria states. These individuals must be chronically homeless, meaning they must be unsheltered. They could be duplicated, living with other persons, or living in a hotel. Once those persons are identified, they too also contact the coordinated care entry for an appointment. Then once they are processed, they are prioritized, and we bring them in to do an assessment to determine what their needs are. Once we determine that they are appropriate for the Shelter Plus Care program, we will then partner with one of the local landlords that we have contracts with that provide housing opportunities to them. In addition to providing the housing opportunities, we also provide support services. Those support services include, but not may include, case management services, psychosocial rehab programs, nursing services, as well as therapy. And the hope is that we can help them to continue to be in housing and within an 18 to 24 month period, transition to something more permanent. So as the PowerPoint states, currently there's 48 Portsmouth residents being served in the Shelter Plus Care program, which puts us at full capacity.
So our point-in-time count. So let's talk about that a little bit. Annually, there is a point-in-time count that is done by all localities. And our last one was done on January 27th to the 28th. It provides you with a 24-hour snapshot of where some of these homeless people might be. So we have people that actually go out, and PVH usually helps with that, but they go out and they do a count. Now, the reason why this count was a little different is because we were also in COVID. So when you take into account where people were before on the streets and where we found them, and you couple that with COVID, there was a lot of dynamics that might have taken place now, meaning people weren't where they normally would be, and that could be for a lot of different reasons. They could have been sheltered in a hotel. They could have went with their family because of COVID, but everybody wasn't where they would have normally been. So what it shows is that we had a decrease in our count. It shows that there was a 38% decrease from the persons counted. We had a count of 149 persons. As of 8/24, there are approximately 106 homeless individuals. Many of them have vouchers, though, and are trying to find apartments, which we know that's where the challenge is. It's not so much that we are not getting vouchers or other resources. It's actually finding affordable housing for them to get into, which is our challenge. So one of the things that the COC does is we also identify in our meeting service gaps. When we're looking at the homeless and what services they need, what are some of the other things that we need to take into account that may not be there or in limited supply? So one of those things are a homeless single shelter, and we'll talk about that towards the end. A place where they can go where there's kind of a one-stop shop. When you think about homeless and you think about services, when you have services from one end of the city to another end of the city and here and there, you have to think about how do we expect people to access those services when they're all over the place? So what you want to do is have an environment, a place where they can go, where the services are brought into them and not having them try to run around and find these things. Affordable housing, health care, wellness support and follow-up. And that reminds me, so here's an example. There is in Richmond, and let me know if I'm wrong, Nate, it's called the Daily Planet. They have a program where when the homeless are in need of medical attention and support, they actually can go to a shelter that provides that. Our Maryview Hospital here sends people up to Richmond there. My question or concern was, well, how do they get back? They don't send them back. So if somebody needed that medical attention and they went to the hospital, you have to look at, we don't have a shelter or some kind of system where when you're homeless, how does somebody come and give you that aftercare? Where do you go? So Maryview, we've been in conversations with them, Nathan and I, but that's what we found out about that Daily Planet program. That would be something, if the different localities got together, that would be a really nice regional effort because this is another support. But that's how they did it up there. But I just found that to be a very interesting program. Transportation, again, would be one of those service gaps, and permanent housing. So action initiatives. So when we began this project, who did we bring in to consult? So obviously, DSS consulted with our own COC. We consulted with Stop Inc. Veteran Services. We did reach out and have a meeting with the faith-based community. We had a meeting with Bond Secure. We also met with PRHA. We've had conversations, but not a full meeting that we're scheduling with the other following agencies: the police and the sheriff department, economic development, business community, and homeless citizens. Because I think when you are planning things as it relates to a shelter, you really need the input from a lot of different people. So again, I think we lose things if we only stick with ourselves and only hear ourselves speak. We need to open that up and get other ideas. For actual shelter site visits, Nathan Woodard and I, we visited the 4-Kids shelter in South Norfolk. I don't know if any of you have had the opportunity to visit it, but it is absolutely awesome. Yeah, it's awesome. We saw it from the beginnings, middles to end. And we went over there again because when we're looking at what we want to develop for Portsmouth, it's getting those ideas of what some of those needs are. And we actually did get a lot of good ideas, and we'll talk about those later. We also visited Virginia Beach Housing Resource Center, the 4 Oaks Day Service Center in Newport News. And you see I got the Daily Planet there because we really wanted to go up and peek at Richmond and see what they were doing. As you know, Portsmouth City Council recently took over the Restore Shelter. The Restore Shelter is a year-round emergency homeless shelter for the city of Portsmouth, and it's managed by her. The capacity for the Restore Shelter is 25 beds. The city of Portsmouth recently required that shelter in October 1st, 2021. And then I just put up the number for the Regional Crisis Housing Hotline, because sometimes people have asked me for that. That number is 587-4202. That is that number people will call into when they're looking for housing assistance. So in thinking about what we want to do when we establish a shelter in Portsmouth, we're always looking at the need. We're looking at how do we involve our stakeholders. We're looking at our current community resources, as well as what would be the ideal location. So in the ideas that we got from visiting the other shelters, and we're talking about some of those support or wraparound services, our shelter needs to be a place where it's not just meals, laundry, and shower services, but it also provides outreach and day services. There needs to be something, information that we can work with those homeless citizens as it relates to employment services. This is where we should be partnering with economic development and workforce development with these individuals. There needs to be behavioral health supports there, as well as social service supports. We want to have an opportunity for medical screenings to be able to come on site, a place for transitional housing, and a resource center. So it's just looking at what some of these things might look like. And it doesn't mean that this is it, but it's just telling you some of the things that we were actually thinking about. So in looking at all of these things, we thought about an ideal place having at least shared space. At least shared space. An opportunity where within the shelter there are other offices or areas for other service providers to come in on site and provide those services, whether it be DSS, whether it be behavioral health, whether it be workforce development, because again, it's eliminating any of these barriers for people with transportation, other things. No, we need to be bringing these services into them. The location. DSS backyard. So the location that we looked at is, if you think about the DSS building, as you see there, DSS, the circumference of the building, we have 4 large parking lots. One of the parking lots that is underutilized is the parking lot on County Street that sits directly in front of the Oasis building. And if you know the Oasis Social Ministries, the other half of that building was utilized by Portsmouth Volunteers for the Homeless. This is a place where our citizens know. The reason why I think it's an ideal place is because also you're right across the street from social services for us to be there and provide continued support. You're right there for behavioral health. And then we have our new, what is that, the health, yes, that is over in that area. So again, it's trying to look at what is really conducive. So one of the things when I looked at that location, and I actually happened to just be riding around in the street and pulled over into our back parking lot to think about some things. And as I'm sitting there, I start looking around going, wait a minute. What about this parking lot? Let me call engineering to see if this is the appropriate size, or this is something that we can do. So I did consult with Bob Baldwin, James Wright. One of the questions were, and I'm thinking of Councilman Battle, the city now owns the property now. So because we now own the DSS building, which we took possession of this past November, the circumference in that lot belongs to the city now. We wanted to make sure that there was enough parking in the other 3 lots of DSS for citizens, and there is. And I look at the traffic that's in that parking lot in the back. It's a large enough space for us to build a structure, to provide parking, and to keep our homeless citizens around those supportive services that they so need. So this is the part where I ask you, do you have any questions for me?
Ms. Littlehill, thank you for your presentation. And if you just hold on, we'll see if my colleagues have any questions.
Sure.
Mr. Battle, sir, you have the floor.
Just to say that I am extremely optimistic because of employees like you guys. You're innovative, you're creative, and above all, you care. And you know how important it is for all the agencies to be included in this fight. So I'm extremely optimistic, and I'd like to say you both are doing a wonderful job. I'm the liaison for your boards, and I'm there, and you astonish me with your creativeness and your display of we care. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Councilwoman Lucas Burke, ma'am, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ms. Littlehill and Mr. Woodard, for the presentation today. I was looking through the presentation, and you mentioned that there was some partnership with PRHA, and I know that we're looking to build a facility for our homeless, but how would PRHA be involved in that? Would there be some vouchers or some
That's what it is.
housing?
PRHA, because of the vouchers that they received, one of the stipulations is that they must work with the COC.
Okay.
So
Got it.
they go through and work with our coordinated entry. When people are appropriate, we refer them, and we have that partnership. So although there were 4 people who are actually in, there are other applications that they already have from us that are in the works.
Right. And do we know on a ballpark figure about how many people we would need to serve, or do we just go and try to do the best we can to
You
serve?
mean in
the-
terms of that shelter?
Yes.
My thought was around 45 to 50 people that we can build a shelter site like that. Those are those report backs we need to get with you with engineering and the size of the building and what we could feasibly do that would make sense. But that, what was in my head.
Great. Thank you.
Dr. Whitaker, sir, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Little for that presentation. Just to follow up, that figure that you gave of 45, you said 45 to 50 would be able.
Looking to be able to be housed in the shelter.
Right.
It's getting that number and looking at, when we worked with or collaborate with PRHA now, it's looking at, on an average, how many people, when we were rotating through the churches, did they serve? And that number was around 40. And it was like, well, we can look at between 40 and 50 people, meaning it would be co-ed. You have X amount of beds allotted for women, X amount allotted for men. And obviously, the family shelter would be restored.
Right. So when we use a figure in the presentation where you accounted for the number of homeless, I think that's around page 12, the point in time count,
Yes.
that figure of 100 in 2020, 149 persons, and then in August of this year, 106 homeless persons. So how does that correlate with 40 and 50?
Well, again, when we have shelter, it's looking at people at different times. That
Okay.
just gives us what our homeless count is. So let me give you a little bit of history. DSS, along with other people, one day I sent my staff out just to speak to some of the homeless citizens that we have. And one of the interesting things is not everybody is willing to go into a shelter. They know it's there, but they have their reasons why. Some of the reasons that DSS found out why were people felt that I would not have my independence and be free to come and go, and shelter is too restricting, you're going to have rules. They just had different reasons. Some with mental health issues that just did not want to be there. So we look at, again, how many we serve now versus how many people are actually on the street but actually want to go into a shelter. It doesn't mean that we don't outreach to those people and still try to provide them with supportive services. We have different agencies that do that, but it's still their choice. A lot of our hot officers with the police department actually know who some of these individuals are, and some individuals on the street that I got from our hot officers that appear to be homeless are actually not. There's more mental health issues. They have families. They have a place to go. They just choose not to.
Right. So does this number account for children?
No, no.
So this is just, so when we get figures from the
Oh,
school.
wait, I'll point in time count. Our children are in there. My point in time? Yeah. That's a point in time count for everyone. It does include children as well as adults.
So the school system has a population or record of homeless children as well. Has that number been coordinated with social services?
Not necessarily. That count is just the count of who's actually on the street at the time. And it doesn't mean that it's an accurate depiction because people move. It means where I think you may be today, it may not be where you are tomorrow. So that's why it's called the snapshot, and every locality goes where I know some are over here by the bridge, I know some are over here, and that's that one night where we go out where we pretty much know where they are. Now, it doesn't mean that when the shelter, when we start developing and looking at things and what we need, that we would not work with the school as well as other entities. That's why I said there's still a lot of meetings to go and people that we need to talk to so that we can really get an idea of who we're servicing, what we need. But when it comes to children, those wouldn't be a part of the single shelter anyway. The children would be a part of the restore shelter.
Okay. And I have some more questions, but I'll yield to the other council members. But this one I want to ask the city manager. What is the timeline that we're looking at as far as actually implementing the shelter expansion?
As soon as the council approves those funds, we are starting the design at that time.
Okay.
Councilmember Moody, sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. I enjoyed the presentation, very enlightening. My question, too, is in the point in time count. So this is not a count of people partaking of the services, but people who are on the street.
Correct. Not everybody. Some of them are already connected with services, whether it be through Virginia Supported Housing or Portsmouth Volunteers for the Homeless, but not everyone.
Well, I guess my question is to get a good comparison. I would think that's extremely difficult from year to year. Like you mentioned earlier, the homeless people move around.
They do.
And I know it's always good to get a count, I guess, but as whether it's a trend up or down, I would think that's extremely hard to get since you can't cover the same territory year to year, same geographics, because people may be somewhere else. So is this a standard that's used everywhere? Or
It is. This is a HUD mandate because this is how localities present their numbers to HUD, how we receive funding. So everybody does, like each city does a point and count, and you look at the data. Everybody realized, even HUD, when it came to COVID, why there might be differences this year in our numbers from what they normally are. In that chart, it gives you Portsmouth's count from 2015-16 through, and it lets you see although we've decreased, we're still somewhere between 150 and 149.
Yeah, and once again, the decrease, we can't ascertain that that's exactly correct on account of people moving around. So I guess that's a best guess.
And people sometimes go from city to city. You know, sometimes people will go over the line and I'm going to go over here into Norfolk, and well, now I'm going to come back and go into Portsmouth. And
Right.
the same people that were not there that one night that we do that count could very well show up tomorrow. But the count is still done because we want to let the government know we still have these citizens, they're still out here, we still need you, so any money you can send us would be appreciated.
Right. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Woodard, sir.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, great presentation, Ms. Littlehill. I got a question about the Shelter Plus Care program. In your presentation, it says you guys are servicing 48 homeless people right now. Is that a normal number, or do that fluctuate, or is that depicted on funding or staffing issues?
Yeah, that is a grant-based program. Currently, the monies that we receive from HUD only allows us to serve 48 persons. Again, part of our ability to increase those numbers is through the point-in-time count. When the COC does that every January, then we submit that information to HUD. Then HUD will give us the ability to increase those numbers or decrease those numbers or allocate funding through other COC programs. So it does fluctuate, but for this year, it is at 48.
And could you just give us in little details exactly what you guys do with these services? I know Ms. Littlehill may have said some things, but, you know, I just want to get a little bit more detail exactly what transpired with the Shelter Plus Care.
Sure. Many of the persons that we find that are in our Shelter Plus Care program are recovering from a mental health substance use disorder. So oftentimes we bring them in. We have appointments so that they can get an initial assessment to determine exactly what they would need. Some of those folk would need case management services. Case management services will assist them in linking them to different services like benefits, DRS for jobs. They may also take them to medical appointments. A lot of homeless folks we see never have had physicals or haven't had physicals in years. So they take them to the doctor so they can get a medical workup and see what medical needs need to be done. In addition, through that assessment, we may determine that the person needs individual counseling. So we have therapists at BHS that will provide individual counseling. A lot of homeless folk that we find have had some type of trauma issues, whether it's, we find a lot of veterans that are homeless, unfortunately, in our community, that have come back from conflicts across the world. So we provide treatment and counseling for those persons. We also find persons that may have been connected to systems and were provided medications to help them with their mental health and substance use issues. So we also provide psychiatric services. So those persons can then come in to see a psychiatrist on a regular basis and get their medications so they can be viable citizens within our community.
Thank you, Mr. Woodard. And once again, like I say, I appreciate the work you guys do, and I think that was the details that I was looking for this program. I think it's an excellent program, and it is something I think that you know, a lot of homeless people or people that's in need can really benefit from such program that you guys provide. So thank you once again for your
You're welcome.
presentation.
And if I could, I want to inform you guys of another program that we started new via direction from the state, which is called Same-Day Access. Our Same-Day Access is a program wherein which anyone that has a substance use, mental health, or intellectual disability that is in need of services, say probably 2 years ago, that person would have to call us and go on a wait list. It would probably take them up to 30 to 60 days to actually get an appointment to see an assessor. Now, with our same-day access, it's literally that the person can come in that same day and get an assessment done to determine what he or she needs, and then be referred to those services, and those services will start within 72 hours.
Thank you,
Dr.
Mr.
Whitaker,
Woodard.
sir, did you have an additional question?
Yes. And Mr. Woodard, while you're here, I had a question written down while you were speaking.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned that the housing contracts that you have with different vendors, how are those vendors determined?
Many of those vendors we have, they have been with us for almost a decade now. But in order for any new vendor to come on board with us, they must provide an application to the COC, which is the Continuum of Care. Once they do that, they are screened. Part of that screening process is that we physically go out to that home and make sure that it's a home that you and I would like to live in.
Right.
So we don't want to have persons that are living in substandard housing.
Right.
Or
Right. So how were those initial vendors selected? Because you said they've been in there for decades. How were they determined to be vendors? Did they apply? Was there some RFP sent out? How did that happen?
Yes, it is an application process where in which they have to submit an application, which is pretty detailed.
So how are they made aware? I guess, how are they made aware of this?
We go out into the community and do presentations, the COC, as well as social services and behavioral health care services, letting different landlords, property managers know of this service.
So, I mean, I'm curious, when you give these presentations, are they publicized or are there certain?
Yes, sir.
How-
They are
how-
public. Typically, we would do it on, I think we do them on the website, but don't quote me on that. But I think that the first place that we do is publicize them on the city website. And then we also, by word of mouth, have had a lot of vendors, current vendors, talk to us and say, well, I know I have a friend that is a vendor. I would like to become a vendor as well. So it's a combination of both, us publicizing it as well as word of mouth.
Okay.
And each vendor receives each individual that's in Shelter Plus Care receives a subsidy, 1/3 of what that rent, fair market rent may be. So for instance, if the rent is $1,000, but the individual only receives SSI, which could possibly be up to $400 to $600 a month. So they pay part of that rent, and the subsidy from HUD will pay the other portion.
Yeah. All right.
Now, if
Thank
they're not working, then the whole thing will be paid for by the state until they are employed.
Okay. Well, the reason I'm asking is I'm always concerned and making sure we're doing it in an equitable way that
Yes, sir.
persons can be involved in, because in essence, that's a form of contracting with the city. And so just want to,
And we also have what's called the Shelter Plus Care Case Manager that goes out and visit each location that we have the contractual agreement with on a quarterly basis. So she can lay eyes, number one, make sure the house is the way it was when we saw it in the first time, and to make sure that they're still providing the services within that home as agreed upon with the MOU
yeah,
and
my
agreement.
concern is how do you even get involved in the initiation of getting involved in the program? That's what
So I think I understand what you're saying. And in other words, with all the different apartment complex here, for them to have a fair opportunity to know or be a vendor for the Shelter Plus Care contract. Is that
Right.
what you are?
Right.
Okay. So Mr. Whitted has been with us a few months, but historically, and it's something that we can look at and still do right now, is look at how do we engage those vendors? And we can do that, again, moving forward under Mr. Woodard with advertising those, having the case manager go to, because we have a list of all the apartment complexes here, to see if we can get some of the landlords on board. So we don't necessarily have a select, I think when Mr. Woodard came on, there were vendors that behavioral health were already working with, but it certainly does not mean that we can't periodically say, hey, do you know about our Shelter Plus Care program here that's offered? And this is how you can become one of the vendors. So point noted.
Okay. And Ms. Liddy, I had on the eviction diversion information that you gave, is this similar to the general relief fund that the city used to have, or is that something different?
Something different.
Okay.
When the city gave out the money and we were paying the rents through the CARES Act funds, we were able to do it directly, and that was a help. Once that money was exhausted, it doesn't mean that the work stops. It just means that, especially when social services, the state has said, we will take on a lot of those applications so that you can get on with doing a regular business. So all those applications come now through the state, and there's still money for that. Now, two things usually happen when we give people not just that information to the state to apply for that money, and then we also give them information to legal aid as it relates to evictions and those kinds of things. But we also call and follow up and say, hey, did you make contact? who did you speak to? And if we hear anything else, information through the COC, we always pass it through.
Okay.
They're going to get that information anyway from the Housing Crisis Hotline, but when people call social services, we give them that information directly as well.
And once again, how are citizens made aware of these funds, that you have rent and mortgage relief available?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
How are citizens made aware that you have rent and mortgage relief funds available?
We have advertised it on the city website. We have put it up there, and as a matter of fact, I looked at it a week ago so that I can get them to post it up there again. And in that, I posted all the legal aid numbers. I posted the information for you to apply with the state to get the funds. So we keep it going. So as you know, advertisements or things like that will run on the city website for a minute, then it will go off, and then I'll call and say there's something that we need to put up there again.
Yeah, I think that's something that you might want to look at as far as how we're marketing information to citizens, because everyone's not accessing the website.
And there is a spot on the website when you go under services and you go under homeless and you click on homeless, it's going to connect you to PHAC and those support services. That part stays on the city's website, but we have been working with our internal IT to help out the COC with getting information up there.
Yeah. And who is eligible for these relief funds?
Anybody.
Anybody that needs
If
mortgage or
anybody
rent?
is at risk of losing their house and needs support, anybody can apply.
Yeah, so, yeah, that needs to be made broader, yeah.
Madam City Manager, and then Vice Mayor Barnes.
Yes, I just wanted to speak to the communication issue. That has been a consistent concern that's been communicated to the city. We've just recently hired a new public relations firm. We will be working with them. In addition, we're going to have a meeting with the Civic League leadership to talk about how we can communicate and what other mechanisms we can use. So we're looking across the board to try to figure out how we communicate better and recognize that not everyone is looking at the city's website, not everyone is looking at YouTube, that we need to think about a variety of mechanisms to communicate and get the word out, because that is the number one issue that we hear consistently, is people are unaware of what the city is doing.
Vice Mayor Barnes, sir, you have the floor.
To go back on what you were just talking about, I've mentioned it a couple of times. I know everybody's not on social media, but a great deal of people are on social media, and I think we need to put a budget towards sponsoring ads. That is, again, something that can get across the internet and touch a lot of people. I do it all the time with some of the things that I do, and I think you can touch a lot of people and get this information out to those people so that they can take advantage of these opportunities.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Littlehill, thank you. Mr. Woodard, thank you. And I would like to just take a moment to recognize our team from Portsmouth, Volunteers for the Homeless, Dr. Darlene Sparks Washington and her team. Thank you all for what you do in our community. It is a very important service that you provide, and we're grateful to have you. Thank you, ma'am. Madam City Manager?
Yes, at this time, I would like to take the opportunity to provide a summary to council regarding a number of report back items that have been distributed, just to give a summary and to allow for questions if there are questions. The first being an RFP for upgrading Mount Calvary, Fisher's Hill, and Lincoln Memorial cemeteries. The Mount Calvary Cemetery Complex, consisting of Potter's Field, Mount Olive, Fisher's Hill, and Mount Calvary, are all city-owned cemeteries. Ground maintenance is maintained on a 10-day cycle. City staff fill in sunken graves, sites, adjust leaning tombstones, monuments, maintain fencing, and the gravel roads. Any additional CIP improvements would need to have an assessment done to identify where the grave sites are located and to ensure that we're not disturbing graves. We estimate this cost at between $200,000 and $300,000 for each complex. In the case of the Lincoln Cemetery, the city will need to obtain the owner's permission to access the property prior to any assessment. The owner has expressed an interest to convey the property to the city. However, prior to initiating the process, the city would need to complete due diligence to enable an informed decision. In addition, based on a preliminary conversation with a funeral home operator and owner, the city is exploring the possibility of the Lincoln Cemetery being transferred to a consortium of local funeral homeowners. It was stated that that could be an opportunity for those funeral homeowners to give back to the city. That also would probably mean some kind of partnership with the city. But at any rate, there may be an interest to moving forward to without transferring the property to the city. Again, that's at the preliminary stages, and we just started the conversation, but we'll keep you apprised as that moves forward. At any rate, that will still need to be an assessment done, much like the other cemetery, to determine where graves are located, et cetera. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Mr. Mayor. Yeah.
Sir, you have the floor.
As we know, the conditions of these cemeteries, due to neglect, racism, and discrimination from the past that continues to perpetuate. And I'm concerned with the approach in that why is it that we're not looking to bid out to see if there are companies that would possibly be interested in restoring the cemeteries and competing at a cost to do that?
Oh, we are. That will be a part of the assessment.
Well, of what assessment?
The assessment in terms of, first you have to understand where the graves are. So a part of that initial, before you can do any work, you have to understand and do an assessment of where the graves are. Then you could go in and have an RFP to look at what can you do to restore this? What is it going to take to restore it?
Well, why wouldn't it be that company doing that? Why is it that why is the city doing that assessment? Why is it that we would not include that as part of the RFP to do the assessment?
It doesn't negate the city from not doing it as a part of the RFP, but I mean, that's a possibility. We can explore all of that, but we wanted to have an idea of what we were looking at before we wanted to move forward with getting an RFP.
Well, my concern is that this has dragged on for the condition. It was here before you came, of course, and but the process, I think it needs to be accelerated to putting out a bid on it, to seeing who would be interested in restoring that and what that cost would be.
Oh, sure.
The other issue with the consortium of funeral homes, I don't see any of the other cemeteries under a consortium of funeral directors. It's maintained by the city.
Yes.
Though the Oak Grove and the historically white cemeteries have been maintained by the city. If you're putting it back into the hands of a funeral consortium, you may be running back into the same problem that we have now, where the cost becomes too great, and then we're back where we were at the start.
And that is a possibility, but we wanted to explore that since they came to us. And so we thought it only prudent to be able to sit down. If that's a recommendation that they want us to consider, then we just felt that that was appropriate to take that in consideration. That doesn't negate us from still going forward with some kind of measure to see what it will take to restore it.
Yeah, well, like I said, I think it needs to go out on a bid and stop this.
I'm all for that. That gives us information. I'm all for doing that.
So when can you do that?
We can do it as soon as we leave this meeting, and tomorrow I can direct staff to develop an RFP that would inform the city of what is required. But first, for Lincoln Cemetery, we would need to get the owner's approval.
Right.
Yeah, and I thought the letter that Attorney Stromberg sent to us, the owners are willing to transfer that back over to the city.
That is correct.
Right.
Some question about ownership right now. A church owned that cemetery, entered an agreement with this entity from Norfolk to take ownership. They signed an agreement apparently, but the deed has not been recorded. But both parties, whether it's the church or whether it's this entity from Norfolk, are willing to gift the cemetery to the city if the city so desires.
Right, because they can't maintain it.
Councilwoman Lucasberg.
Yeah,
have the
thank you,
floor.
Mayor. Yes, I too have spoken to some funeral home directors. They're reaching out because everyone wants something done. And the concern that was brought back to me was there is a drainage issue that may be a liability. So I don't believe the funeral homes are looking to take on that liability. The understanding is if the city could make it aesthetically pleasing with the fence so that we don't have another issue with someone running into the plots, maybe keeping the grass cut and trimming the trees to help it look like it is, somewhere where you would want to put, your loved ones at that time. I think that's the concern, but the drainage is an issue, and since we are going to be using infrastructure funding for our water, sewer, I was just wondering if that's something that could be taken into consideration, since that's a big dollar item.
If that is the council's desire, yes, that could be considered a part of the infrastructure request under ARPA funds, because it is water and sewer related.
I have a question for our attorney. Before we move forward with RFP requests and those types of requests, do we need to have a consensus before we move forward in that manner? As it relates to the order?
I think that's probably in everyone's best interest, is to have council behind it to make sure it's not just one person, so.
Okay, very good. Councilmember Woodard, sir.
Before we take a consensus, is it a complete transfer of ownership before we, make any type of agreement on this cemetery as a whole?
I'm sorry, ask your question again?
Well, he agreed to transfer the cemetery over, but at the same time, is it a complete transaction or?
It would be a complete transaction. However, there's liability concerns,
Right.
there could be pending suits, and so that all has to be worked out as to whether there was insurance, if there's any pending liability claims. Typical thing when you acquire, say, a business even, all those things are discussed. So before any transfer is made, we would make sure that we're getting clear title and we're getting.
Right, so, are we in the correct state to start creating RFPs for it and, before we complete the whole transfer? Making consensus about it,
Yeah, if there's a consensus to put out an RFP, I think we can move forward with that because there's other cemeteries that are under that will be under that RFP, and if for some reason the city doesn't acquire Lincoln, then we just won't move forward with anything. But if it acquires it, we have that, the estimate of what it would take to fix it up. So I think that could be done without ownership, certainly on the other cemeteries which we already own.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Councilman Moody, sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. My question is to the attorney. What are the state guidelines as far as perpetual care and reference the current ownership? What I don't want to see us get into a situation where there's some hidden liabilities there that the taxpayer is going to have to assume.
Yeah, sure. There's several exceptions to having to maintain a perpetual fund. I think I copied the law in my memo to you all several weeks ago. And the church is under one of those exceptions where it doesn't have to keep perpetual care. And we'd have to look into the city's obligation. We do have a perpetual care account in the city or fund, but there's a $1 million corpus in there, and there's 88,000 over and above that can be used, and it is used to maintain several of these cemeteries. right now, that some of that interest is used. As far as the obligation of maintaining a perpetual fund in the future, I think that city would probably qualify. That the one we have right now, we would probably just continue paying into that.
Well, you mentioned the cemeteries, it's a dual ownership between the church and a private individual?
It's not really dual. Right now, the church has the recorded deed, or the church, the cemeteries that in the name of the church, is owned by the church as far as recorded deeds. They have executed a deed to this Norfolk entity, and that Norfolk entity never filed the deed, so there's nothing of record showing that transfer.
Right.
So for all intents and purposes, the church still owns the cemetery. They want to get rid of it, as does this Norfolk entity. So it's there if the city wants it.
Thanks.
Sure.
Yes, sir. Just make sure we're clear. The discussion here is only around one cemetery where there's an issue. Mount Calvary complex is already owned by the city.
Right.
So the RFP issue of one cemetery really doesn't have a lot of merit to it because you're just exploring. You're not committing yourself to anything.
Thank you, sir. So based on the discussion, what I'm hearing is we need to get a consensus in order to ask the manager to move forward with the assessment of.
To move forward
No,
with an RFP.
Hold on. Can I finish my thought, please, sir?
Help
I
yourself.
wasn't through talking. I was going to get there.
Mayor, go right on.
Okay,
don't have
thank
to
you,
go
sir.
through all of that. Just go right on.
Sir?
Just go right on. You don't have to act like that.
But you
I wasn't
didn't
doing it.
have the floor,
I
sir.
wasn't doing it.
Thank you.
Causing
Thank you,
harm.
sir. As I was stating before, the request is to ask the manager to get an assessment through an RFP process and bring back that information that is included in that assessment from the RFP process to inform us of the status of Lincoln Cemetery for consideration as we move forward in the process.
No, that's not it's just simply to direct.
Ma'am, could you go forward with that request, please? That's what we heard, and I'm going to call for a consensus. I'm just going to call for a consensus. Do we have a consensus to move forward?
Just a point
on-
of order.
Sir, your point of order is not recognized.
Okay.
Thank
well,
you.
Can I ask a consistent
Sir,
counsel to ask
you
a
are out of
question?
order. You are out of order. I am the chair right now, and I'm handling the question. I had the question before the floor.
You didn't put the question.
And I
correctly.
was asking the body for the consensus before you interrupted, so I have the floor, sir.
Why are you trying to make it argumentative? I'm just trying.
It's
to
not argumentative, sir. What I'm sharing with you is I had the floor, and until I yield the floor and recognize you, you don't have the floor. That's the rules.
But, Mr. Mayor, can we get greater clarity before you put that to the board?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We can get greater clarity. Sir, you have the floor.
Yes. The issue is not an RFP, as you mentioned, around Lincoln. It's an RFP for the cemetery complexes that have been listed here in the report. Mount Calvary Cemetery Complex, as well as Lincoln. That's what we're requesting, a consensus on an RFP for restoration of the Mount Calvary Cemetery Complex and the Lincoln Cemetery.
Thank you, sir. Are we clear?
Yes.
Are we clear, sir? Is that what we're requesting? Are we clear? Yes? Okay. Okay, I just wanted to make sure. So, if we're in agreement of that, give us a show of hands in agreement of that. Thank you.
Okay.
Madam City Manager, would you continue,
Yes,
please?
the next item was update on the strategic plan for the African American Museum. The museums and tourism department staff have begun fostering necessary relationships with the community To ensure more inclusive events and activities, the building at 206 High Street has been identified as a potential location to house a central comprehensive African American History Museum long-term. In the short term, the city is partnering with organizations to enable temporary opportunities to share Portsmouth's history, such as the current photo exhibit. As we proceed with formalizing the long-term strategy and finalizing the location, this allows us the necessary time to identify and develop the essential sections for the museum. It also allows us to determine the existing artifacts and verify their authenticity. Are there questions?
Dr. Whitaker, you have the floor, sir.
Yes, my issue is simply, again, what's the timeline that we're looking at with this? Because we have mentioned this issue months ago, and we haven't had any movement on it. We've had citizens come before us and make presentations, and so what is the timeline for actually putting something in place, concrete, that we know we're moving towards this goal?
Well, that is to be defined, because at this point, the only location that we have identified is 206 High Street, and that is currently being occupied by the police department staff. So until we can find a permanent location for the police department staff, it's hard to move forward with using this as a museum and making it a long-term location. So there are a number of things that are contingent on moving forward with this in any defined procedure until we identify some of those specific locations.
Do you have any further questions, sir? Any questions this end? Ma'am, you may continue.
The next is the update on minority contracting, including identification of companies, dollars spent. The city is moving forward in addressing the items listed as future in the previous report back provided to council. Specifically, staff is working on developing the job specifications for the minority business coordinator position, as well as defining reporting requirements to monitor the minority business and women-owned business efforts. Regarding the minority contract spending, the city spent $3.6 million in fiscal year 2019-2020 with 5 contractors, and in fiscal year 2021, it spent $1.7 million with 5 contractors, and a number of activities were impacted due to COVID during the fiscal year 2021 fiscal year.
Councilmember Battle, sir, you have the floor.
Do we know the total amount that we spent for contractors, period?
We do, and I can provide that in a report back.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Dr. Whitaker, sir, you have the floor.
Yeah. And this is, again, this is before your tenure here. And this is why you have to have people on council who are conscious. This report is dismal. For the fiscal year 2019-2020, the city spent $3.6 million with 5 contractors, 4 of which were minority businesses, which we don't know within that minority classification who they are.
Right.
And the other was with a white woman business. Note here that 2.4 million of the 3.6 million was spent with a firm that represents 2/3 of the amount of all of the spending. And that's, to me, that's just neglect, is dismal, is showing no regard for contracting. And then in this past year, 2021, 1.7 million. And Mr. Battle asked a relevant question, how much have we spent in total? But when you look at our general fund and our other fund balances and who we're contracting with, this doesn't even represent 1%. And I think in a majority African-American city, and with dealing with the poverty issues and who typically these minority businesses employ, this is total neglect. And I asked for this information over a month ago, and this is poor. This is poor, where you can count on your hands how many minority vendors we're contracting with. And this is unacceptable. It's unacceptable.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Battle, sir, you have the floor.
When we're dealing with contracts for the city, the council has been basically hands-off. And you see, when we enter into bad contracts, the buck stops with us. So maybe we're going to, as a council, need to get involved with contracting, if only to have major contracts brought before us and tell us the positivenesses of why they were chosen and what are the stipulations in it, such as have they low bidded? Is this bid in stone, or do they low bid and are they coming back with an addendum? See, these are the things that the city's getting hurt with, and the council, the buck stops with us. And we sit here and we allow this to happen, and again, the buck stops with us. So when we're dealing with the major contracts, 500,000 or above, possibly, this is just something that I'm mentioning, we need to see the contracts involved and told why this one was chosen, to make sure that all those cost overruns that have been being in the different contracts don't get past us. Because, yes, we trust our administrations to do what's right, but we have to verify that they're doing what's right, because at the end, when there's a situation like the hotel started out at $28 million, ended up at $48 million. These are the things that have been happening to our city. So consequently, we lose services for the development of our youth. Consequently, the burden of the taxation on our folks' back. So that's something we're going to need to look at, because, again, the buck stops with us. And we need to know why you made this decision, why these folk, is it etched in cement what they're doing? Are they cost overruns? Are there addendums that's coming later? And the addendum is way more than the midstream bidder's bid was. So I'm just suggesting that this is a good business practice, and maybe we need to look at it. I'm saying, as a council person, I want to look at it, because, again, when we make mistakes like that or allow them to occur, and then we stand back and say, well, I didn't have anything to do with that. They did that, and it was done, and we can't do. The buck stops with us. So we're going to assume the responsibility of the flow of this money, and we need to have a better hand in controlling and making sure that these contracts that come out that represent us truly represent us. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Moody, sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. I think what I'm hearing is that we have some members that want to usurp the authority of our purchasing department and also of our CEO of our city. And I think when you stray into want to have a say in contract procurement and qualifications of those submitting contracts, I think without a doubt you're straying outside your line as a council member. It's our city manager's responsibility to manage that. We have, matter of fact, Mr. Ammons, last time I checked, is African American, and having dealt with him way before I got on city council in the food distribution business, I know he's a very professional individual, and he runs a tight ship, and more importantly, he follows the procurement laws of the state of Virginia. So I don't want to see council members getting anywhere near deciding where a contract should be let. That's not our job, and if you insist on doing it, you may get in some legal trouble.
Yes.
You have the floor.
Yes, thank you. I didn't bring up any individuals. The issue that you're speaking to, Mr. Moody, I think the numbers speak for themselves, that we've had neglect in this area, and it's really not defensible. I'm not here trying to bring up anyone's professionalism. I'm trying to bring up the outcomes that we're seeing based on these numbers. We have made a change in that now. Some of you may remember we changed the ordinance. We're now the city manager, not the purchasing director. The city manager is responsible, and the city manager is accountable to council, whereas before we could not intervene. Here we can. And so that change has been made. And so I think for our city manager, I'm glad to see that, well, we knew a disparity study had to be done to update our figures. However, it's our policy that really needs to be addressed and enforced and holding persons accountable so that these figures, we will see improvement. Now, as far as getting in and reading each contract, the city manager can be questioned about our contracts. And so I think our policy has to be put in place and enforced and hold people accountable.
Thank you, sir. And before, Madam City Manager, did you have your hand up? Did you need to say something? Or?
No.
Okay, Councilman Battle, and then Councilmember Moody.
Mr. Moody, please don't play that game of as a black man to give a corrupt system possibly validity. Don't do that. Stop that. I'm not looking at color. I'm looking at saving the citizens money to help cure some of the ills that we have. Now, I'm not saying doing his job, but he going over the city manager to bring back to us of why he chose it, what's the validity and the positive nature of that contract, and to make sure that there aren't any pit holes in the contract. Now, had we not have a history of such things existing, I would never mention this, but it exists. And when you have problems like that, you don't sit back, you attack them, you see where the problem is. No, I don't have the training he does, but there's not a contract under the sun that I can't read and give a thorough report on. So, if there are large contracts, 500,000 or more, he needs to go to the city manager, she needs to bring it to us. This is the contract, this is why we chose it, these are the advantages, these are the disadvantages, so we can straighten out the disadvantages. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Moody, sir, you have the floor.
Mr. Battle, if you were insinuating there's some corruption, I would think you would want to be specific and alert our city attorney and city manager of any corruption that you've ascertained. Also, once again, you're directing a city employee. Last time I checked, the purchasing director is a city employee. You're directing the city employee on what to do. Once again, that responsibility lies with the city manager.
Yeah, well,
And this, you know, when this whole thing came about, it's still not this council's responsibility to direct the city manager on what award to make in the procurement process. That's not council's responsibility.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor.
We're going to have one more round of questions on this, and we need to move on, so go ahead,
Yeah,
sir.
I don't want misinformation to go out like that. That is not the council responsibility to direct the city manager on what contracts to award. I don't think anyone has insinuated that. It is council's responsibility to pass policy. And that's what I'm speaking to, that we pass policies, enforce them, and hold people accountable. That's what I'm speaking to. Now, all of this other tangential information you're speaking to, I don't know where that's coming from. But I just want to make sure it's clear, as a council, we do create policy.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Battle, did you want the floor one more time, sir?
Yes, sir. All I'm saying is, Mr. Moody, I don't think it's fair where you're trying to carry this. There has been a problem for years about minorities not getting contracts. There have been problems for years about the golden calves getting the lucrative, juicy contracts. And until we fix that, we're not going to be able to get our streets straight. We're not going to be able to elevate the quality of life for our citizens. We're not going to be able to roll back these excessive taxes on our citizens. So I don't care how we do it. It's a way for us to have a better control of the money. We allocate the money. That's what we're here to do. And we need to be a watchdog for it as well. And there's nothing wrong with us going over a contract after, listen, there are many contracts that I'm still scratching my head on how the city got involved with them. And that's because we had a hands-off council that allowed the subordinates to do the things that we're responsible for. We need to assume our responsibilities and do them well and take care of this money and distribute it in a fair manner. That's all I'm saying, Mr. Moody. Now, how you chalked it up, that's your thoughts about it. But I'm just looking at the good thing of improving the quality of life for the citizens. You got to take care of your money to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Madam City Manager?
This is a perfect segue into the next item, which is the disparity study RFP update. The city staff published the RFP on Demand Star and the state website, EVA, on November 1st, as previously stated. All responses are due November 30th, 2021. The city will evaluate and make a selection by the end of the year, with the contract award and the study projected to begin early January 2022.
Thank you, ma'am. Does that complete your report?
No,
Okay.
I have a couple more items.
Go ahead, ma'am.
The next one was regarding youth employment, internships, summer jobs, school year employment. The city is working in partnership with PPS, the CTE Advisory Board, and the Hampton Roads Workforce Council to provide a variety of youth internships and employment opportunities for both the summer and permanent employment. The goal is to have school year intern students in place at the Naval Medical Center and Bon Secures as early as the 2022-2023 school year. At present, these discussions involve students in the CTE Certified Nurse Assistant and Medical Technology programs. However, efforts are underway to expand this to include other CTE and PPS programs, including the CTE Culinary Program and the entry-level Human Resources. In addition to Bon Secures and Navy Medical Center, additional internship discussions are ongoing for placement of CTE students in the culinary, early learning, and horticultural fields, including a possibility of placing early learning students as paid school year teacher assistants in PPS elementary school during the school year. The Workforce Council provides summer internships through their Next Gen internship program. The Workforce Council is also in discussions with the Hampton Roads Sanitation District to create a paid pre-apprentice program for high school students with barriers to employment and training. This 9-week intensive program will be a paid position and will be equivalent to a student's first year of an apprenticeship with the Hampton Roads Sanitation District. In regards to city staff, we created a new position this past summer to attract teenagers for employment in recreation centers, parks, and for special events. The position is titled Teen Recreation Aide. We opened 25 vacancies for this position, for this part-time position, paying a rate of $14 per hour. Applicants that are 16 years of age and older are eligible to apply. As noted before and by many other employers, this post-pandemic environment has made it challenging. However, we continue to try to use every resource we have to get the word out. We currently have 7 teenage staff actively working, 3 in the hiring pipeline, either waiting for background checks or waiting to attend new employee orientation. And the position is once again posted on the city's website for interested applicants to apply.
Vice Mayor Barnes, you have the floor, sir.
I'm glad you mentioned that part, because that was going to be my question. Because when I was younger, I remember the younger people working in the rec centers and the summer programs. Oh, I'm sorry. What I was saying is that I remember when I was younger, we had the teenagers working in the Parks and Recs programs when I was younger, going to the summer programs that they had. I do want to know which age group, what's the youngest?
16.
16? Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Ma'am, do you have any further
One
appointments? Okay, well, you have the floor, ma'am.
Okay. Update on any discussions with the superintendent regarding a facility for career and technical training, plumber, HVAC, electrical construction. Numerous discussions have occurred between the city and PPS regarding a facility for career and technical training, including but not limited to plumbers, HVAC, electrical, construction, carpenters, etc. The initial meeting occurred on August 5th, and the participants included Dr. Bracy, Dr. Anita Nguyen, Mr. Craig Hill, CTA Advisory Board co-chairs, Mr. Gary Bahena, and Ms. Jeannie McCoy, and city staff. Initially, there was some concern that parents and students may not be interested in skilled trades. However, we agreed to move forward with exploring options once PPS addressed their first priority of readapting students back into the classroom. The development of a career and technical training facility is a standing item on my monthly PPS meeting with Dr. Bracy. Various options from an additional wing to a standalone facility are being explored for consideration to address this need in the city. And that's all the report backs that I have.
Thank you, ma'am, for that very comprehensive report. It's greatly appreciated, and thank you to the city staff. I know a lot of time and effort went into that. Do we have any city liaison reports at this time? Mr. Woodard?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Seeing none, we do have a need to go into a closed session. And And Vice Mayor Barnes or Dr. Whitaker, would you like to read the motion to go into closed session?
Mayor, that was asked for by an email. I'm wondering if there's a consent first.
Well, we do need a consensus first before we move forward. So is there a consensus to go into closed session to discuss the matters presented in the motion?
Thank you.
You're welcome, sir. Please proceed with the motion.
I move to go into closed meeting pursuant to Virginia Code subsection 2.2-3711A.7 for the purpose of consultation with legal counsel pertaining to actual or probable litigation where such consultation and open meeting would adversely affect the negotiating or litigating posture of the city, specifically regarding events related to the monument protests and workers' compensation.
Is there a second?
Second.
Madam Clerk, would you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Barnes?
Yes.
Mr. Battle?
Yes.
Mrs. Lucas Burke?
Yes.
Mr. Moody?
No, and I would also like to say I did not consent to the motion because I'm opposed to awarding any of the protesters money that participated in the destruction of the Confederate War Monument. So I will not be participating in the closed session.
Dr. Whitaker?
Yes.
Mr. Woodard?
Yes.
Mayor Glover?
Yes. We are in closed session. Vice Mayor Barnes, could you please read the motion to come out of close?
I hereby move that each council member certify that, to the best of his or her knowledge, only public business matters lawfully exempt from open meeting requirements under the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, and only such public business matters as were identified in the motion by which the closed meeting was convened were heard, discussed, or considered in the closed meeting just concluded.
Thank you, sir. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second.
Madam Clerk, would you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Barnes?
Yes.
Mr. Battle?
Yes.
Mrs. Lucas Burke?
Yes.
Mr. Moody?
Yes.
Dr. Whitaker?
Yes.
Mr. Woodard?
Yes.
Mayor Glover?
Yes. We are to close. We're going to take a 5-minute recess, and then we will begin the council meeting. Thank you.